Hi guys, my name's Pierre. I am the CEO, co-founder at Searoutes. We're a carbon emission platform for shippers, forwarders, and carriers. And today, um, I have the pleasure of having Lars Jensen with me, CEO of Vespucci Marine. Thank you for joining us, Lars.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, pleasure. Pleasure is ours. We're together for the next hour to explore how the new maritime alliances between ocean carriers will affect logistics. So some of the things we'll look at is will it have an impact on freight rates? What's the consequence potentially on lead times? What does that mean for carbon emissions? Potentially EU ETS. So we're also expecting to have Marko Hahn joining us later, Global Logistics Procurement from BASF. But like any live event, sometimes things happen, and Marko hasn't joined us yet. So we expect to see him a little bit later. Cool. So my first question is for Lars. In 2017, you wrote that book, Liner Shipping, in 2025, How to Survive and Thrive. I wonder if you thought back then that we'd be here today in 2025, and what you thought we would end up to.
To some degrees, yes. I mean, first things first, obviously in 2017, no, I did not in the book predict we were going to have a pandemic or a closure of the Red Sea. So clearly that was not captured.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I would say the underlying trends I outlined in the book have panned out. Some of the main underlying trends were that we did have more consolidation in the industry, both amongst the carriers, but also amongst the forwarders, that we would continue to see the major alliances dominate the major deep sea trades, which is exactly what we had, that we would also see an evolution of the market. So it was not just spot rate and the usual, let's call it, unenforceable contracts, but we might increasingly see both a market for enforceable contracts and also for more index-linked contracts. And that's actually where the market is also moving now. You can say it hasn't necessarily moved as far on some of those topics. Again, that's where the pandemic disruptions come in.
Yeah.
But a lot of those underlying trends absolutely have been panning out.
Yeah, that's right. So between 2017 and 2025, today there's been COVID, there's been strikes, there's been Ever Given getting stuck, there's been congestions in different port, the Red Sea now, and the alliances, and definitely this has had consequences for freight procurement, right? So today it has an impact on rates. These have normalized to some extent. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more from Marko on that end. But it will definitely have an impact on lead times too, and on CO2. So yeah, let's get into this maybe a little bit more in details. Maybe before we go into all of this, can you remind us, maybe Lars, can you recall maybe for us what the ocean alliances were and what they are now
Yeah, I mean,
after 1st of February?
yeah, you can say we've had a landscape for the past 8 years where we had 2M with Maersk and MSC operating. Then we had the TAG alliance with Hapag-Lloyd, ONE, Hyundai, and Yangming. And then we had the Ocean Alliance, I was about to say, with the rest of the big guys, which would mean CMA, CGM, COSCO, and Evergreen. Usually when you see the logos, you show a OOCL as well. But as hopefully everybody knows, OOCL is a part of COSCO as well. And what was then changed, and we've been knowing this for now a year that this was coming, was the trigger point was the breakup of the 2M alliance, something that did not surprise me in the least.
Do you have
Because,
insights for why that happened?
well, I would rather say it this way. I was out 2 months before that was even announced and said that this was going to happen. And that's not because I had any inside information. It was more from the position that when 2M was formed, that was a marriage of convenience. Both parties needed that alliance to have a scale advantage. Their interests at that point in time were aligned. Keep in mind, we had a major market downturn in 2016. So the key for both of them was just operational cost reductions. And that was fine. But we had reached a point where they were no longer strategically aligned at all. You can see an MSC with an enormous order book, clearly growing rapidly. On the other hand, you have a Maersk that for years have basically stated they don't want to grow. They want to increase profitability and increase on logistics services on the existing volume. So there was a very clear disparity between the two strategies. So it was evident that they were going to break up, and they did. So the question was, when they break up, how would that shake up the landscape? And what we then end up with is, now we have a standalone MSC for the first time in something like 15 years. We have somebody that's large enough to really do this without being in any alliance. Maersk then draw in Hapag-Lloyd to form the Gemini Corporation. Apparently, they don't like the word alliance, so they call it a cooperation instead. I think that's more for wordsmithing. And also on the wordsmithing side, forgive me if I simply call everybody alliances. I would probably also say that MSC as an alliance is just an alliance of
by himself.
It just makes it easier to talk about the market, right? Then we have the remainder of the THE, which is now called the Premier Alliance. So that's now just ONE, Hyundai, and Yangming. And the only one that does not change at all is the Ocean Alliance. And all of these now are on track to be in existence out to something like 2032. So this is the landscape. I would also like to.
So that means,
I just wanted to remind everybody that this change is not a unique event. I mean, we have had alliances break up and reshape multiple times over at least the 25 years I've been in the industry. So from that perspective, this is not a unique event. It happens, again, typically every 5, 6, 7 years. Now we have another one. But it also means that the alliance constellations we're seeing now is likely also what the market will look like until the early 2030s.
Yeah, that's right. So that means we need a new book that says 2025
liner shipping 2032 or something like that effect.
2032. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, you said it yourself, and that the 2M alliance was dissolved, and one of the consequences of this is that MSC now is staying alone. One of the questions that we've gotten from some of the clients is, are they clear winners and losers of these new alliance reshuffle, and can MSC cover all the regions with the same capacity? So that's a big one. Is there clear winners and losers, and if so, on which trade lanes or which?
Yeah, you can say it's too early to point out winners or losers, because that depends on how these new products are received by the customers. I would rather put it this way and say some of the different new alliances have different opportunities and challenges compared to what we've seen before. I mean, if we take two of the outer poles here, we have MSC on one hand. I mean, does MSC have enough ships? Absolutely, yes, they do. Yeah, MSC have gone down, developing a network focused very much on having as much direct port-port combinations as possible. If you look at especially the Asia-Europe trade, but they're also by a slim margin the top dog on the Trans-Pacific in terms of offering the most direct port-port combinations. At the other end of the extreme is the new concept launched by Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd in Gemini. They have gone down the path of calling very few but large transshipment hubs, usually operated by themselves. And then they have introduced what they call shuttles. Basically, it's very large feeders. The difference is usually feeders, when we think of them, are third-party feeders operated outside of the alliance scope. These shuttles are operated within the Gemini alliance scope, so by Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd as well. And from my perspective, this means if at least if it's executed correctly, I would have an assumption here that the Gemini overall network cost might be more competitive than what you see from MSC. I don't know. I don't see the internal numbers from either of those two alliances. But when I analyze network dynamics overall, you're usually better off, if you have a hub and spoke network, on having few but very, very large hubs. That sounds counterintuitive, because if you go direct, clearly there is no transshipment cost. So how can this be cheaper? But it's down to, if you do go direct, you have very large ships, and at the outer edges of your rotation, the outer ports, those ships are going to be very, very poorly utilized. Whereas if you have the other setup, your vessel is going to be highly utilized for the big ones. Then you have smaller shuttle vessels, which will then also have a high degree of utilization, simply because they're smaller.
So this hub and spoke model is something that we've seen in the airline business, for instance. It's something that you've seen. Some airlines have consolidated to huge hubs, like in Atlanta for Delta and so forth. And some other airlines have decided to take kind of the direct approach by having as many airports served as possible. So it's interesting to see how you can take parallels into the maritime. One of the things that you just said, which is, you'll have bigger ships in the Gemini cooperation serving large ports. This will have, there's obvious questions on if this shuttle strategy will have an impact on lead times, and if they'll be able to have transshipment fast enough in the large hubs.
But
meet
there
their
are a couple of things about that one, because if you look at the schedules that are now out by the carriers, it's not as easy as saying a direct is always faster than a transshipment, because that is not the case. You clearly have points where a direct is faster. That's the obvious one. You can find plenty of examples where MSC, for example, have a better transit time than Gemini. But you can also find the opposite, where sure, MSC has a direct service, Gemini does not. But then MSC goes on a major milk run and calls a lot of ports along the way, and that will take time, whereas the one that goes to the main ports and then get transshipped is faster, providing, of course, the transshipment then is pulled off flawlessly.
Do you think this reshuffling of capacities then? So obviously it's rotations, it's vessels on services and rotations, but it's a capacity shift to some extent. Do you think it'll make it harder for people to procure the volume that they need? So that's a question that we would probably direct to Marko here if he joins us later. But do you think it'll be easier, more difficult for companies like BASF, for instance, to get the volumes they need on the port pairs they need?
No, I don't think that's any change, because this is where I would look at it from the macro perspective. The overall capacity offered in the market is slightly up compared to the other alliances. So not really any change there. If I was sitting on the shipper side, I would also look at it. We go from a setup with 3 major alliances to now having 4 major alliances, which all else equal should increase the competitive pressure.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And so there's no real capacity bottlenecks, and obviously this reshuffling doesn't really give the advantage to a particular carrier. What you're saying is, hey, look, there's different strategies, and let's see which strategy plays out to be the best, right? So I guess lots of expectations on.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be where suddenly everybody says, well, this was the winning one, so one alliance gets everything and the other alliances gets nothing. That's not how it's going to work. There will be shippers that have different preferences out there. But give it, I would say, a couple of years, and we will likely see in which direction this overall goes. And if it does turn out that either the direct one is more commercially successful or the hub and spoke one is more commercially successful, we will gradually see all alliances slowly migrate towards the more successful option.
Yeah, that's fair. So there'll be some. We should expect some readjustments during the year. That's
absolutely.
Good to see. Yeah.
We already saw a few readjustments even before the new networks were fully launched, as they were fine tuning, and this is also where there's a difference, right? Because MSC as a standalone, that also makes it a lot easier for them to be flexible and adjust their networks. The challenge always in an alliance, you need all members to agree on these changes. That takes time. Different carriers have different preferences for which port calls they want. That just makes it more difficult to adjust the network. Whereas MSC, I would expect to be able to adjust that in a much more flexible and agile way.
Yeah. So do you think it's going to have an impact on pricing to some extent? So now, like the shippers often criticize the carriers for having pretty opaque pricing. They have this tender process where, the way it functions is they have these volumes per port pair, and then they go see each carrier individually and ask them for a quote, some lead times, and then the services that they would nominate, and then they consolidate these prices back, do their analysis, and then hopefully come out with the best allocation possible per port pair. Which carrier am I going to put here? Which carrier I'm going to put there? And if you ask 2 shippers which rates they got, or if you do a sample of 10 shippers, which rate they got from different carriers on port pairs, you may be surprised, obviously, what the different pricing is. It's pretty opaque. Do you think these new alliances?
No, I don't see that's going to change at all for a couple of reasons. First of all, let's keep in mind the alliances are operational in nature. So
That's
any
right.
hint that pricing mechanisms between a carrier and a shipper would change because of changes in the alliances would de facto be the same as saying there's an element of collusion going on, which I fundamentally don't see in the market. I really don't see that one. And also, you're now selling slightly different rotations, slightly different services, but that in itself is not going to change the way a carrier sees their tender or pricing processes. They can, of course, change them, but I don't see that changing in the short term. Two other things on the pricing element is there's the potential for different pricing shifts between the carriers, and then there's the pricing shift overall in the market. I mean, we're going to have a roller coaster ride with the market depending on whether or not the Red Sea reopens, but that's equal for all the carriers, irrespective of alliances.
Yeah.
The other one, just to finish that one, is at least I met the question many times. Will Gemini, if they are more reliable, be able to extract a price premium, for example? And I would not assume that to be the case. Given past history in the market out there, I don't think there will be room for a major price premium, even if they actually do pull off a more reliable product. What I see, again, if they're successful in pulling it off, they might end up with a selection of customers that might be willing to give them a slightly share of their business, or customers that might be slightly more loyal. That, of course, has a monetary value as well, but I'm not convinced they're going to be in a market where they can charge a huge premium for being more reliable.
Yeah, that's right. So if the reliability increases and the CO2 is reduced on their services, and they have a direct advantage to competition, then they'll have that they can leverage it. They have a leverage and they can put prices up. But that's not something to expect right away. No. That's right. I think, Marko, you're joining us exactly at the right time, because we've been talking about how these new alliances will impact freight rates. Maybe just to reintroduce you to people that have joined us. So Marko Hahn is Global Logistics Procurement at BASF. It's good to have you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I was telling Lars earlier that you always need an element of drama in these in this TV reality, right? So to make it exciting for people. So here's one. But that's good. So we were just talking with Lars about the state of the maritime alliances. We went through what are the new alliances, what were the old alliances, and why and why things are the way they are today. Lars was telling us something quite interesting, that Gemini prefers kind of a model where they'll serve large ports and work with shuttles into smaller ports, while MSC now seems to operate their network with a lot more direct connections, also because they have more capacity. So that'd be interesting to see, which model plays out and which one is more efficient. I'm quite curious to see if Gemini will be able to hold on their transit time with that strategy, but that's something else. So maybe a question to Marko that just joined us is, maybe can you run us through the freight procurement process, maybe at kind of a high level, and how you negotiate with carriers and in kind of in several terms to eventually allocate, and then the follow-up to this will be if these new alliances has changed the process that you guys have put in place.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. Hello, Lars. Hello, Pierre. Hello to the audience. My name is Marko Hahn. I'm working for BASF Maritime Procurement, and indeed, those are challenging times that we are in at the moment. Especially, or not especially, here for BASF, and as well, I guess, for any other shipper. It's been different, preparing for our actual tenders. So we had a lot more of an extended preparation with the carriers together, understanding their approach, understanding their new setup. So talking about transit times, talking about port coverages, transshipment, shuttle liner capacity, etc., etc. And one of the examples, for example, for BASF, which makes it somehow different, especially with regards to Gemini, is they have reduced, for example, their port their Antwerp calls for their loops, or at least for some of them. Antwerp, or BASF has a site in Antwerp. We here in Ludwigshafen, where we are located with our big site, we do ship a lot out of Antwerp. Antwerp's been one of the last calls in the North Continent loop. So we are indeed, we are now facing maybe the last port of calls with our mainliners, but as well our pre-leg system, our pre-leg setup is a little bit, I would say, optimized to the setup which it has been before. So, for example, there was a lot of traffic over the Rhine River. We may now see a little bit of a shift more towards, for example, the German ports, where some of the loops have the last call. So that was different for this period, and you probably have discussed it. So as well, we see the risks. We see, of course, the lift. We see the risk with the startup phase, with the phase in, phase out. Some of the capacity issues that we hear. That some Ocean Alliance still. I just read it in one of the benchmarking newsletter today that they're looking for vessels still. But as well, I think Lars just said there maybe won't be a premium on Gemini, but still, what I personally believe, as an example, from Antwerp to Visakhapatnam in India, we had a direct service with Hapag-Lloyd. We used to have. I think there will be 2 transshipments. So just from an economical point of view, they need to run now, let's say, 3 vessels in order to provide this A to B connection. And I wonder if that has an impact on cost. Maybe.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, it's a very good point, Marko, what you're bringing. So what you're saying is your decision of procurement is to decide if you continue routing via Antwerp, since you have all that inland logistics figured out already. So do you continue using Antwerp as a hub? And then, so with Gemini, you're subject to the shuttle strategy, or do you switch port to the German ports to benefit from more direct services from Gemini? In which case, you're going to need to adjust your inland logistics. So that has a direct impact on your own network, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so again, that touches to what Lars was saying earlier. Is this, can this shuttle setup serve shippers the same way? Probably not a direct impact on cost. That would be unfair, but definitely one additional transshipment. So maybe lead time issues. I don't know what you think about this, Lars, but
no, go ahead, Lars.
And for lead time issues, it's very much down to the individual port combination, where you do have. I think one of the examples is if you go, for example, Busan to Rotterdam, which is a core leg for many carriers. Gemini does not do this directly. They have a shuttle from Busan down to Pilipes, but they still have a faster time there than if you book on the direct Busan Rotterdam on MSC, because as mentioned, MSC then goes on a slight milk run with a bunch of Chinese ports along the way.
That's right.
The trick here then becomes, do you trust that Gemini will make that connection and run on time? And at least what I've heard from quite a bunch of BCOs over the last 6 months is, no, the trust is not quite there. And I can understand why. I mean, everybody has become very jaded over the last 5 years. To be quite honest, nothing has run on time for any carrier over the last 5 years. And sure, it's COVID and Red Sea and whatever have you. So I can understand why a lot of shippers, they want to see it before they believe it. So the ball is in Gemini's court to show that they can actually do it. The only thing I want to flag there, if we do look back to more normal times, say 2019, or if you look on Asia-Europe, the most reliable alliance at that point was 2M. They were consistently pulling above 90% reliability. So from my perspective, the goal that's been stated by Gemini is not unreasonable. It's also not unreasonable to expect. The open question is then, are they able to operationally pull it off this time? And that's where I say most BCOs I'm talking to, they're not going to take their word for it. They're going to want to see it done in practice first.
That's right. So 2025 is the year of a witness. So who's right? That's going to be interesting to see play out.
Yeah, and this is where timing becomes important, because right now everything is in chaos as the new networks are phased in. That's also what's likely causing some of the congestion and bottlenecks we're seeing in European ports. So clearly we have a couple of months of transition effects. Then, if we are lucky, the Red Sea reopens, then we're going to have another couple of months of transition effects, which means that the hope of seeing this 90% reliability, that's not going to happen until, say, Q3, maybe Q4 this year.
Yeah, that makes sense. Marko, was it difficult for you this year to organize in the procurement phase to figure out, for a given port pair, what services you would end up allocating to? Service names have changed. Some are not available anymore. Then you have new services available with certain carriers. Did that cause a major headaches? How did you manage this year?
No, I would say this is what I tried to initially say, that we had quite an extended preparation phase with that. Really, we talked to, especially with the Gemini partners, we had discussions with each and every trade manager. They were explaining us how the new setup is looking like. So we were able to, let's say, to understand all the main, let's say, the physical parameters. But what Lars just said, and he has the experience with other BCOs, it's about trust at the moment. Yeah, I mean, so you need to see that these services are reliable. So one of the key strategies, and I think that I speak for all the shippers, was even more than maybe in the past, was portfolio diversification. Maybe to share your risk even more than maybe you did in the past, and not put all your eggs in one basket. Even the price may have voted for this, but as well, you have some existing services in your portfolio, and as well we did a lot of discussions with them for having more flexibility with the incumbents, for example. So on the one hand, you have this new setup which is going to work out with regards to when it comes to reliability, but as well we had a lot of discussions with the incumbent players to say, okay, how is your flexibility with this at the moment? And of course we agreed with the partners to really stay close, especially in the implementation phase, to stay close, to stay very much in contact, to be able to react, to be able to know what is going to happen, and if there is a need to reallocate, for example.
Yeah, so the advice that you'll give, and I'll recap this at the end of this discussion, is talk to your carrier, basically. Make sure that you have an open connection with them, and that you have all the information that you need. I kind of want to switch gear here, since we're talking about carriers and the data that they were able to give you guys at BASF, but I guess other shippers as well. With the new rotation, so maybe first of all, every carrier has schedules that they either publish online on their website or via APIs or by other means. So I'm guessing there's a huge reorganizations of data internally as well, at least on schedules, maybe just for now. And I'm wondering what you guys think will happen, at least short term, as this is shifting. Should we expect maybe the data that we'll get from carriers to remain accurate, either by API, EDI, on their schedules? And how easy is it going to be to get the truth from them to some extent? Maybe a question for Lars to start.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy, and there are several layers to that one. First of all, are the individual carriers' practical ability to do this? That boils down to what are their backend systems practically capable of, and they are not all on the same level there. That is problem number one. Then problem number two, even to the degree they're able to it, is how late in the game do they operationally change their mind? Either if they permanently change a service, or what is more likely, ad hoc make a change. I mean, some of the congestion we've seen in European ports the last few weeks.
Yeah,
is to some degree driven by carriers with just a few days advance notice. And oh my God, it's horribly congested. Let's skip this port and go to another port, which means that everybody's going to be told at a very, very late stage. So you have these two different effects overlaying. Are they capable of even doing this from a system perspective? To also at times making this decision very, very late in the game. And then comes another element on top, where I would expect alliances with a lot of players to have a slow decision process to make major changes, because you need 4 partners to agree in the largest case.
Exactly.
And in the other case of MSC, I would expect MSC at times to make very, very rapid changes. I mean, if you look back over the history of decades on how is it MSC operates, they would rather operate from the perspective of trying to fill their ships to the best of their ability. And if that means skipping a port or adding a port or changing something ad hoc, then that's what they typically do.
Yeah. So, I think you're totally right. I think it's going to be pretty difficult also because they're not data companies. They're businesses, the business of moving containers around and operating vessels. So we should expect the data that we get from them directly in terms of quality to drop, because it depends on how fast they'll be able to respond to this. What we've seen is that a lot of them have their marketing ready. That is, we get a lot of PDFs and the new rotations are there on their website and stuff. But the schedule explorers that you get on some of them and the data they get in their APIs is something that's somewhat in flux at the moment. You don't have all the rotations. There's overlap of services that don't exist anymore with the new ones. And so that's definitely going to complicate things around. I'm wondering if that's an opportunity for people that have better data sets. So quid of if the visibility providers will be able to do better. So I don't know if that's a question for both of you guys, if you think that this is where we'll find the truth to some extent.
To some degree, with the risk of being very provocative here, I mean, visibility providers have halfway been promising this for the last 15 years. And the core of the problem is actually not with the visibility providers. The core is, again, what is the raw data from the carriers? And if the carriers, even internally in their own systems, don't accurately capture what their ops departments are doing, it is an uphill battle.
Yeah, that's right. So
I would agree with this. I fully would agree with this. We have seen it seems that carriers are the ones changing something in their setup. They seem to be well prepared. Yeah, so we have seen all those schedules. We're saying, okay, here normally you go directly to Busan, but then with the service change, now we take off this vessel. I don't know, like in Shanghai before. But at the end, when it comes to the real operations, then we do not get the updates that much in time that we can that we're happy with at the moment. The network seems to be very complicated. Decisions are very short-term. Systems from the carrier, really, as Lars said, they're different among the carrier, and even the ones with the very sophisticated system, we do have the appearance, or we do have the impression that that information is not getting into our system in time. Absolutely.
But I've also another one, not that I'm necessarily here to defend the carriers, but from a practical perspective, let's also keep in mind that the carriers only coordinate inside their own alliance. So I can sit within an alliance and say, okay, now I got this whole phase over to my new network. That's great. I don't want to overwhelm the port I'm going to. So I used to send in, say, 3 ships in a week. Now I'm only sending in 2. That sounds great. But then suddenly all 4 alliances are sending in 2 ships on the same weekday. With inevitable massive congestion. And that problem is not necessarily going to be solved. The way to solve that is then we should allow all the carriers to coordinate their capacity across all of them. Again, that has been, at least from an EU perspective, illegal since 2008 to make that kind of competitive coordination.
That's interesting. Yeah. So one of the predictions that we'll make at the end of this discussion is more congestion because of this, reshuffling of schedules and potentially, having ports that receive a lot of vessels at the same time because of this lack of discussion. Yeah.
At least in the short term now that it's phasing in, but the congestion we're seeing now, I think everybody should also keep in the back of our minds, this is nothing. When the Red Sea reopens, let's hope the Red Sea reopens. When that happens, we're going to see the worst congestion we have ever seen in Europe. It is going to be an operational nightmare. And it is positive news to open the Red Sea, but in practical terms, the supply chain is going to shrink by 10 to 14 days. So that means there's going to be a couple of weeks up in Europe where the first ships through Suez overtake the ones through Africa. So for a couple of weeks, we'll have twice the normal number of vessels arrive in port. The ports will have to handle twice the number of boxes. We need trucks and rail for twice the number of boxes. And especially importers, they need to take delivery into their warehouses of twice the amount of cargo that they planned for. This cannot be done. I mean, this is a physical impossibility to handle smoothly. There will be a lot of congestion, and the carriers will respond with a couple of counter moves, the only ones they can. Some vessels will suddenly ditch their planned calls and call secondary ports, at least to try to open a few other gateways. They are also going to be congested, but they will try to do that. The next thing the carriers will do is, if I'm a carrier, say, okay, now I've got 2 big ships rather than 1. So please, dear port, you need to turn this vessel as rapidly as possible. And the best way I can do that is to tell the port, don't load any empties. That will at least partially solve my problem from a carrier perspective. So 2 to 3 months later, we are not getting adequate supplies of empties repositioned out in Asia. So we're going to have a temporary equipment problem out in Asia. You've got all of these different dominoes there. But from a European perspective, if you think we've got congestion problems now, wait until the couple of months after the reopening of the Suez. It's a temporary problem. It's a natural consequence, and it's based on a joyous event that the supply chains will normalize. But don't underestimate the temporary chaos we will see there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you think all the carriers will reopen the routes via Suez at the same time? It's some of the...
Basically, yes. Because if we are in a situation where one alliance says, okay, fine, now we are opening up, from a competitive standpoint, the others will have absolutely no choice.
Yeah. So think about, so obviously there's direct consequences on congestion. Between the lines, what you've said, Lars, is that it would take at the very least 6 months to clear this overcapacity for overcharged containers, at least 6 months to clear. And so, most of the year we'll see fluctuations in schedule, routing, ports getting overwhelmed by containers. What it means is that it will have a direct impact on lead times. And so one of the things I can see is that it'll be difficult for carriers to just process all that information, adjust their schedules in real time. And so for you guys, for instance, Marko at BASF, this is going to be a nightmare just tracking when things are arriving, where. Do you already have something in place internally to anticipate this chaos, or is it something that you guys are concerned about?
We do establish a new site in China, so at the moment, so maybe that helps a little bit. No, I'm just making jokes with that. No, in fact, I fully agree that we will see a lot of chaos. What I personally think, I hope. I mean, as nice as it is that we would be able to go via the Suez Canal again, but I would hope that it will be later than the recent alliance and cooperation reshuffling. So I hope that the market will reach some kind of stability after all this reshuffling. So that we do not see these 2 topics in parallel. That would be my hope. Otherwise, I see a complete chaos for a couple of months happening. So, if we are prepared, I would say we are prepared we are only prepared as any other player here in the market. We do have our track and trace systems, but at the end, with all those implications that Lars just mentioned, it will be a mess. And we don't know at the moment. We hope it's going to still last a little bit, the opening, and then we hopefully carriers will be as prepared as possible.
You can say the slightly cheeky advice I've been dishing out for months here on that one is, at least as a BCO, don't look at a way to solve this problem, because that one doesn't exist in that situation. It's a matter of looking for a solution where you can handle this better than your competitors. That's the name of the game. That's what's on the table.
Yeah. So maybe lock extra capacity with the carriers to make sure that you could, you have more bandwidth moving containers around. But it's interesting. So you guys at BASF have track and trace. One of the bread and butter of a track and trace company has been ETA prediction. ETA prediction was already very difficult in the past, or with Red Sea last year, COVID, the rerouting when Ever Given was blocked is the first of that instance, rerouting around Cape of Good Hope. So that means that we should expect this year that all the models around ETAs, that visibility platforms, or even from the carriers directly, to be somewhat deficient. No, maybe a question for both of you. I don't know what your thoughts are, Lars, on this.
I would say I would probably break that question down in different time frames. Because if you look at, for example, the situation right now, or the situation we'll face when the Red Sea opens, at that point in time, predictive ETAs are not really going to work either. It's going to be all over the place. Right. There's going to be last-minute decisions. So the name of the game there is to be extremely close to the events, and it's hard to see. Yeah. It's hard to see systems help very much in that situation. But we should also not forget that these are temporary situations. It is not the norm. And that's where predictive ETAs will make a lot more sense when the networks are indeed stabilized and are up and running.
Yeah, so that means that, Marko, we should expect a lot of differences between the lead times that the carriers were committing on at the moment of the tender and the actual execution later in the year, right? So that's going to be hard to put one against the other at the end of the year to reconcile.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, all the carriers, they have planned, I mean, with regards to the Suez here, now the carriers have planned with the Cape of Good Hope scenario. So we have established our system accordingly. So I can hardly predict how the new scenario will look like, especially if it's some going through the some vessels going through the Suez, some still going around the Cape of Good Hope. It's about what I initially said a little bit. We had some discussion about flexibility with all the market players. So maybe some will do better. Some will do better in that situation. And of course, as a shipper, you need to. You always need to still be in discussion with all the shippers in order to be flexible, in order to be fast when it comes to that situation.
And maybe we should also not forget, when Ocean Alliance, they have the same network. I would not expect a lot of changes from them because the alliance structure hasn't changed. But for the three other alliances, these are brand new networks. So they have been designed somewhere at a desk from a theoretical perspective. What do we think is the best optimal? What do we think our customers are going to need? And I bet you over the course of the next 12 months, even if the phase in here is smooth and we don't get the Red Sea disruptions, these networks are bound to change. Because as they then meet reality, every one of these alliances will then find they were not completely optimal to what the customer uptake actually was. So we should expect in these networks to see some additions and some removals and some shuffles in port calls.
Yeah, you're totally right. And this change in network is something that will have impacts everywhere. So we talked about lead times, we talked rates at the beginning of the conversations. You're famous, Lars, for one of your posts on LinkedIn where you were comparing the emissions calculator of the different alliances or the different carriers, rather, where for the same service you would get different numbers depending on the different carriers. This is something that will just be exacerbated this year, so extrapolated to some extent, because carriers know very well how to estimate the emissions of their vessels, the ones that they operate. Obviously, they have data for it, but they have a hard time estimating the emissions of the vessels of the alliance, for which they don't necessarily have the data for. And so
it's partly that, but the issue is also different. I mean, usually I do that every year. I take a look at what do we have of discrepancies, and at least ever since I started doing that in 2011, we still have these discrepancies.
We do, yeah.
And it's not because any of the carriers are cheating. I genuinely don't believe any of them are cheating.
And that's right.
The problem is more, you got so many choices to make, and how do you allocate it? If I run a ship and then it's only half full on the backhaul,
fair enough, yeah.
Where do I place the emissions for all the empty boxes or the empty slots? Or if my container is then transshipped onto a third-party feeder that may have a different methodology,
That's
It's
right.
not rocket science. I can, of course, make a choice, and that's what you do. But there's a million choices to be made that are equally valid, which is why we end up with a lot of different numbers out there.
That's right. But we should see this trend maybe continue because of the new alliances, the new services. Also, these tools on the different carrier website will need to adjust, and they'll have the same problems as with schedules probably already, that try to figure out how to have the right data sets for the vessel schedules, but they'll need to
Yes.
propagate this all the way to emissions as well. So we should anticipate changes there. Is that something, Marko, that you think will affect your reporting, or even the way you use CO2 data during your tender?
Yeah. So with regards to CO2, I mean that's a target that most of the shippers I think have. Looking at the scope 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3 emissions. So as well, what we do, so we have started, for example, to include your data, to include the Searoutes data into our bid sheet. So so that we can say this is the data that you provide. This is the amount. This is the ton of CO2 equivalent per TEU per service, because it's the way we procure it. And yeah, the background is that. We as a chemical company, we ship a lot of commodity goods, and you can be more or less carbon neutral if you use biofuel, but biofuel is an expensive option. So we were thinking about a different option, to reduce our carbon emission. And one could be by adding those CO2 emissions into your bid sheet, to add them into your procurement process, and you can, at least in theory, now distinguish between the different services that emit different. I don't know, maybe Pierre, if you can show some examples. So the theoretical difference between the service can be up to 25%, for example. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
on an EU basis. So. Of course, and that is what it makes it really, of course, difficult. I mean, there's what Lars just said. How is that calculated? Yeah, how good a vessel is utilized on a head haul, on a back haul. But from a theoretical point of view, besides many other factors, and this is very important as well in the procurement process, besides of all those other factors that you have to consider. When you procure, that can be another factor to distinguish when you do your allocation. And
that's right.
At the end of the day, if, let's give a very theoretical example, you have two services, they are having kind of like the same port coverage, they have the kind of same price, DG acceptance, etc. You now have a factor to say, okay, if I choose one of those services, if I want to choose one of those services, I could do the one, or I could choose the one with the lower emission. And maybe to finish on this, I personally want to believe, or I believe this is a way to reduce your carbon footprint. Yeah. I don't know if we are not there yet, but maybe there is a math even behind, because you have cost of CO2 avoidance in your company. These costs are X high. So, and if you look to your figures, you could even spend some more on your procurement when you procure your maritime services. You could even think to add some more to this, because your CO2 avoidance could be less than maybe in a different sector in your company. So this is a theoretical thinking behind, and as well what I hope to believe is because I mean at the moment you have the option of using biofuel. And this is more or less completely paid by the shipper. Yeah. So, and I don't know if, I don't want to suspect here, but carriers from the Fuel EU Maritime, they are forced to add some fuel into their network. And I don't know if shipper at the moment pay for part of it. So by giving the message to the market that might even we hope to incentivize the carrier to even more invest into new technologies, into different kind of fuels, to further develop this whole thing. So then everyone could, everyone, not only the ones paying for the biofuel, everyone in the market would contribute to this whole process. And we have started with the data at the moment. It's not everything developed here. I really have to say there's still internal things that need to be developed when it, for example, comes to documentation for these savings. But at least that's a way we have started at the moment.
Yeah, so I think you're totally right. So first, procurement is rather complex because you're balancing lead time rates, and now there's CO2 in the equation where you can save, but that's yet an extra data point. So it's really hard to put the right process in place. That's totally right. But I think what you just said is exactly where we should go, which is, can you reduce CO2 already by procuring better? In which case, can you spend more on procurement and then less on other projects like either biofuels or compensation or other things, which is a budget that you don't need anymore, right? So that's exactly right. Yeah, you were asking for figure. Yeah, go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
was about to say one important element as well is because there are so many different ways to measure it, different methodologies. I mean, you got yours at Searoutes, you got other platforms, you got the carriers, you got the forwarders. I would look at it this way and say any BCO out there that is serious about reducing their footprint, then it becomes a matter of sitting down and looking at what are the options here? What are the different
That's right.
methodologies? Which one do I believe provides the best possible picture given my exposure to the market? Make that choice and then stick with it the next 5 years or so, because then you can measure genuine changes. And my more cynical view is show me a BCO that changes methodology every year, and I'll show you somebody who's actually not serious about reductions, but just looks for another methodology that makes it look like you get another reduction.
That's right. Yeah. That's funny. I wonder how long you can do this. Once you've tried all the methodologies, then 10 years down the line, then you're out.
Rest assured, then somebody will come up with yet another methodology.
Somebody else will come around. Maybe you're right. Yeah,
No, this is a very good point. Yeah, don't go to every carrier, and because you do get values from different methodologies. So decide for a platform that has, maybe it's not the best of the world, but it's a unified approach to this. They do their approach the same for every carrier. Yeah?
Yeah, we've done some analysis, some examples. Maybe I'll drop them on LinkedIn for people to see, because I see we're getting to the top of the hour, and I want to leave room for questions. But if you take a particular trade, so Trans-Pacific TPM coming up, right? So like we looked at Trans-Pacific. Some of the changes, if you take let's say a Busan to Vancouver, for instance, it's interesting to see how some services, for instance, that used to be available, for instance, for Hapag with the PN3 or PN4, where PN3 is no more operated for Hapag, or there's no more HMM vessels or Yangming vessels there. Now you have to execute on the WC3 or 4, and so the emissions have changed, right? Just because the fleet has changed, and so in some cases you'll be up, plus 40%. In some cases you'll be down, and so that's quite interesting to see. But I think what Lars said is exactly right. Is every shipper operates their own network of port pairs, and so the strategy will be different for each of them. But they have to go to port pair levels and figure out which carrier or service is right for them. So yeah, you're totally right there. Maybe I want to leave the floor for a couple questions. I think you guys can use the comments if you want to ask questions, and we'll pick up a few if you'd like, questions to Lars or to Marko on what we discussed. We'll do this for the next 5 minutes. One of the topics, maybe while we're waiting for a few questions, one of the topics that we did surface, but we didn't talk about it explicitly, is blank sailings. I think between the lines, Lars, what you were saying is we should expect to see a lot more of them. It's especially maybe from MSC that you said we're quick at readjusting. So this year is probably going to be the year of blank sailings to some extent. Probably like we've never seen before.
Yes and no. I mean, we started out this conversation about my book on liner shipping 2025.
Yeah.
And one of the elements touched briefly in the book, and that also panned out up to 2019, was an expectation that the alliances would indeed increasingly use blank sailings. Because from week to week, demand is not the same over the year. And if I'm a single carrier with just one service, I can't really use blank sailings as a tool because it's all or nothing. That doesn't work. But if I'm a major alliance and I have, say, 6 weekly services. Well, if some weeks demand are down 15%, it makes more sense for me to operate 5. I can still move the cargo. I might route it slightly differently. Blank sailings are an extremely useful tool to maintain a relatively high vessel utilization. It will not go away. And analysis of the services the carriers have, especially pre-pandemic, showed that this was also how they designed the networks. Because when you looked at which services were being blanked, it was absolutely not random. If you look at Asia, Europe, every single alliance would have one service which would always be blanked a lot more than the other services. That was the go-to service. It's the one that operates when the market is strong. It's the first one to get called when the market is not strong. And it's a logical way to operate it. You don't want to run all ships if you actually have an entirely empty ship in the aggregate.
So what you're saying is that it's an extremely useful tool for carriers to make sure the rotations are well used and that the vessels are full. So that's something that we'll see.
Yeah, and you can say there are two facets to it. You can sit from a shipper perspective and say this is outrageous because I was promised there was going to be a weekly service on this one, which would be absolutely true. On the other hand, we could take it from the CO2 emissions angle. If there's not enough cargo to fill 6 ships, why are you sailing 6 ships if you can fit them onto 5 ships?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you here. I think it's perfectly fine. Yeah. So I'm just checking in to see if we have a few more questions. One of the other topics, obviously, is so we talked about emissions. I was going to show some examples on the South Pacific as well, but I think what I'm going to do is share these examples on LinkedIn. You'll be able to get in touch with you, and then so we'll give you the full set of examples there. So maybe since there's no more questions here, what I'm going to do is give you kind of one last word each. Maybe what should we tell the audience as kind of a takeaway? I wrote down a few. So what should they watch out for this year with these new alliances? Marko, what do you think we should recommend people to do this year to kind of help themselves prepare for the changes?
So I'd say some of the things that we of course already have discussed. So widen your portfolio. That would be one of my guess. I think many shippers do, many BCOs do. Widen your portfolio. Do not only consider the big players in the market. You probably already have all of them in your portfolio. Try to see the small players. Do spend some time in the analysis. Do spend some time in negotiation. There's always a carrier that is better in that way, and another carrier is better in this way. The smaller can maybe serve this. Maybe you need to adjust your internal systems because smaller players, you may not go with all your EDI connections immediately. So be flexible. That would be my advice with this year.
Yeah, so good advice here to remain flexible. Lars, what can you recommend shippers this year to watch out for? How can they prepare for these new alliances?
Yeah, the be flexible is absolutely the right term. I would have used that one as well. And see it from the perspective, February and March is going to be halfway chaotic because we are facing in hundreds of ships into new services. So don't judge any of the alliances on their performance in February and March. This is just a painful transition period. And be braced for this congestion problem is going to arise. Hopefully, if the Red Sea also reopens, then we're going to get through another transition phase, and then things will absolutely stabilize. The final one, and that's one we haven't even touched upon here at all, is we might see changes again over the next year or two, depending on how the US decides to do the trade war. Right now, the reality is no one has the slightest clue in reality what tariffs will be levied on whom and when and where. No one knows. This changes from day to day and will likely continue to change from day to day. What I would suggest for most shippers out there is don't try to make any long-term changes based on what you hear from the US now. Wait until the dust settles before making any major changes.
Yeah, so that will be the topic of our next webinar, Lars. Maybe we should dedicate a webinar on trade wars. Definitely, this will have an impact, obviously, on networks. But I think that's a good thing. Maybe a good topic to include in your book, Online Shipping 2032. Something to put in there will definitely have an impact. But yeah, I want to thank you both for joining me on this webinar. So thank you, Marko from BASF for joining us, and thank you, Lars, for being with us. So this was State of Navigating Maritime Alliances Structures in 2025. You can find Searoutes obviously on our website, searoutes.com, and we'll be at TPM Los Angeles in 10 days with Lars. So join us there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.